So after months of multiple recommendations on Twitter, YouTube, friends, internet blogs, and more, I finally decided to give My Hero Academia a look. And after watching the first episode and starting the manga, I wanted to share my thoughts with you and discuss this series itself. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video as I'll give you my first impressions and analysis today of watching My Hero Academia. So the first thing we have to do is analyze the opening, and we see that the main character Izuku, also known by his nickname as Deku, is actually being bullied by his rival in Katsuki along with a lot of other kids. And the interesting thing about this is that after Izuku and his friend get beaten up, he lays on the ground and he makes a statement saying that all men aren't created equal. And I think this really foreshadows how he looks at himself in a light and what would happen later on in the episode, as we see that after the time skip that Izuku really hasn't changed and he's still very useless and weak compared to a lot of his comrades. And the interesting thing about this is the nickname Deku literally translates to useless, which is a very fitting name to actually describe the main character. So I feel like the opening and that bully scene really foreshadowed what would happen in the episode. The next thing we have to talk about is the My Hero Academia world, and I must say that the world setup is quite interesting. We see a superhero world in which the majority of people have quirks, or these things that allow them to bring out their abilities, and the interesting thing about this is that the majority of people have these quirks to bring out their powers, whereas if you look at a lot of other works of fictional art, it's the small minute minority of superheroes that have to protect the masses. So when you factor this in, it makes the world much more competitive when you have so many people with abilities, and it also increases the likelihood of somebody being a villain. If everybody has powers, they can use their abilities for negative reasons, or they can also use their abilities for positive reasons, or for their own personal reasons. And I think it adds a much more personalized way to look at powers in this superhero world. And the next thing I should also point out here is it brings me back to a quote from Syndrome in The Incredibles, where he talked about, if everybody has superpowers, then no one will be. And if you translate this to My Hero Academia, if so many people have superpowers, then only the really dominant people are going to rise up at the top, and the weaker ones are going to fall towards the bottom, and it's always going to be wars that are going to be clashing throughout. And I think that was a very interesting concept. And if you were to compare this to another series in One Punch Man, there are definitely some similarities here, and my friend Jaxblade pointed out that the My Hero Academia world could somewhat fit into the One Punch Man world, where society has advanced to the point where they're training generations to fight against all of these future villains. And when you compare this to the One Punch Man world, that series focuses more on superheroes that are more like freaks and anomalies in nature instead of just being a normal part of society. But you can't have a series without having characters, and this leads me into my next point. The main character Deku is very relatable and really shows you a feeling of real life nostalgia and showing how helpless a lot of kids feel in this world. And I can relate to this somewhat similar to having a role model growing up, where you have a kid who might be a big fan of LeBron James or Tom Brady as their athletic superheroes, and the way that Deku looks up to them is the way a lot of kids look up to sports icons, or might look up to a person who might be a great musician. And I think it made his character feel much more personal, as opposed to a lot of other superheroes that have abilities that we can never attain. And if you want to talk about being a relatable character, Deku doesn't even have a quirk, and I think this makes his character stand out even more, because it's sort of like he has a disability when you look at the fact that his mother can attract objects towards herself and his father can breathe fire. So he is this kid in this world with all of his peers having abilities, and he does not have one. Now, the next character we should talk about here is Katsuki, who is the rival and bully to Deku. And if there's one thing I would say about him, is that the episode really went out of its way to make you dislike this character more than anybody else, as you see him looking down on a lot of his classmates, the fact that he's overconfident that he can get into the UA Academy, and I think honestly it really makes this whole relationship between him and Deku much more fierce, because the episode started off with this character bullying Deku from the time that he was a kid. So it really shows you how this rivalry is going to continue burning throughout the series. The next character I should mention here there is Inko, who is Deku's mother, and what I noticed about her is that she seems to be the stereotypical overprotective mother of her child. And this makes a lot of sense when you look at the fact that the episode went out of its way to show you a flashback of Deku not having a quirk. So it makes sense for his mother to be even more overprotective of her child for emotional comfort, as Deku is going to be so different from so many of his peers. And I do think that we're definitely going to see a much more loving relationship between him and his mother moving forward. And when we move on to another female character in this episode, we have Mt.Lady, and what I first noticed about her is her good looks and the fact that she's being used as a sex object so early. When you look at the fact that she mentioned how she's happy to make your ass acquaintance, it immediately separates her from the pack. And when she was fighting earlier in the episode in her giant form, it really gave you a very Titanic feeling watching two large villains fighting against each other like Transformers, and watching how all of the population in the city was just watching it with such awe. So I definitely think Mt.Lady as being an iconic character is going to be interesting moving forward. And last but not least, if there was one more character that caught my interest in this episode other than Mt.Lady for other reasons, it would have to be All Might. And I think the interesting thing about him is that when you look at the fact that there are action figures of this guy, he is a role model, and the fact that he's such an inspiration to Deku, it really gives you that whole superhero feel as if he's this large celebrity in the show. But the really interesting thing about this is that All Might is a very Americanized character, as he has a move called Texas Smash. And when you look at his whole color scheme, he's clearly meant to be an Americanized character. So I definitely feel that it makes All Might a much more Western friendly character for a lot of Western people who might be watching this, because we can relate to his character so much. And this brings me to my next point about the ending of this episode. The episode concludes with Deku having virtually no upstanding qualities. He's weak, clingy, whiny, and a social outcast who is completely defenseless and would have died without the assistance of All Might. And I think the interesting thing about all of this is that when you look at the fact that All Might saved Deku, it really shows you that although Deku loved this character so much before and already admired him, the fact that All Might now actually saves his life and actually spoke to him is going to multiply the amount of admiration and interest that he actually has in the All Might character, and I think we're gonna see this bond moving forward in the future. So I definitely think the ending highlights what's going to happen more in the future itself. But if I were to mention my future expectations for My Hero Academia, I'd have to say that Deku is a character that is at the complete bottom that has a lot of proving to do. And when you compare him to other characters like Saitama and Goku, there's a lot of differences. When you look at Saitama from One Punch Man, he started off at the bottom, but he had to work his way up in the series and ultimately became this uber powerful guy that nobody stands a chance against. And when you compare this to Goku, although Goku wasn't at the top at the beginning of Dragon Ball, he was shown with immediate, very powerful abilities from the very time that we saw him in Dragon Ball. And I think that when you compare it to Izuku or Deku as a character, I think that he has a lot of growing to do, and I think that the show has a lot of potential moving forward. And if I were to say another observation I made about Deku, it would be the fact that his father seems to be absent from his life. And the interesting thing about All Might is that if his father is absent from his life, All Might seems to be a character who could be that paternal figure to him moving forward, to be that role model in his life even more closer up. So I think that this is going to set up a lot of stuff for the future. So overall, guys, I would have to say I really enjoyed the first episode of My Hero Academia. The episode immediately established a loving mother, a rival, a potential father figure, a strong female icon, and a competitive world to which the protagonist doesn't belong in because he doesn't have a quirk. I think the pacing was extremely fast with the establishment of so many characters, and I do think that could potentially turn off some new viewers, but at the same time you could also say that the fast pacing has set a lot of good groundwork moving forward in the series, as many characters have already taken on roles that can advance the plot moving forward. And in terms of character creation, I don't think the staff could have done a better job of making Deku seem more helpless, and I think ultimately seeing the development of Deku moving forward in the future will make his growth world seem even more rich towards us as an audience. So ultimately, the show caught my interest with its superhero concepts, and I look forward to making more My Hero Academia videos in the future. So with everything else said, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys, and let me know what you think about My Hero Academia, things you should advise me to do, and everything that you think about the series.